They say the worst betrayals arrive wearing the same perfume as home. I learned that on a Tuesday when the sun refused to dim and the world looked too clean for what I had to hear. The day began like any other in our town. A slow river of traffic on Main, old men parked at the diner like fixtures, the garage humming with the patience of bolts and grease, and parts that never hurry until they fail. My name is Rowan Hale, and I own Hale Motors, a used lot flanked by a cinderblock shop that still smells like my father's hands when he came in late, skin mapped with scars, laughter leaving oily fingerprints on the air. The sign outside creaks when the wind shifts, a rusted weather vane warning me when the day is about to be difficult. Ilara entered my life 15 years ago at a courthouse auction where I went to bid on a Bankrepo work truck, and she was there to represent a creditor with a sharper pen than the judge's tongue. She was crisp lines and quiet calculation, an ink-blue suit that made the fluorescent lights soften out of respect. She laughed at something I said. I'd called the auctioneer a poet of other people's debts, and for the first time in years I heard my own voice answer without the creak of grief. We married beneath a county fair sky, heat lightning blinking like nerves, my mother crying the way grief and joy are sometimes twins. I worked the lot and turned wrenches. She turned case law into ladder rungs, and for a while we were a promise we kept with both hands. It changed the way brake pads were, incremental, unremarked, inevitable. Ilara's new firm downtown loved war and billable hours more than oxygen, and her boss, Caspian Vale, loved cameras more than people. He was that polished breed of man who calls cruelty foresight and convinces the newspapers to run it on the business page. The first time I heard his name, it was an echo in her kitchen talk. Caspian thinks, Caspian says, as if we'd welcomed a ghost who rearranged the furniture at night and left the chairs slightly off-angle just to see if we noticed. I noticed when she started wearing a cologne that wasn't mine, when her lipstick stopped kissing the rim of our coffee mugs, when our calendar grew a rash of late nights and client socials that tasted like secrets. The confrontation was simple because simple things cut clean. "Are you sleeping with him?" I asked, hands steady because engines taught me to hold my temper where the torque belongs. She didn't say no. Her eyes did that faraway search people do when their story runs ahead of them, and they're debating whether to sprint or pretend they meant to walk. "I didn't plan it," she finally said, which is what people say when they need you to believe that feeling has its own morality. "I chose stability for so long that I forgot how to want the world I fought for," she added, soft and terrible. She said Caspian woke up the part of her that didn't apologize for velocity, that he matched the ambition she'd buried under kindness. Then she said the worst thing a husband can hear without bleeding. "We can be pragmatic about this." Pragmatic was an arrangement. She proposed we stay married, optics, logistics, the soft pillow of mutual history, while she explored what she called a path she'd earned. There were phrases in her pitch that sounded pre-written: structured transition, respectful autonomy, harm reduction, as if a committee had workshopped them. I knew whose mouth had practiced them first. The next day Caspian came to my office without knocking, carrying his confidence like a brand-new suit he planned to return after the event. He gave me a smile with a price tag, sat without being asked, and used my first name as if he were paying me to like it. "We can do this with dignity," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Divorce drafts, property carve-outs, a non-disparagement clause printed on paper that whispered when you touched it. "Your wife has outgrown this zip code," he added conversationally, as if discussing a blazer. "You're a decent man, Rowan, but men like me set the weather." I didn't hit him. I remember that, because in other stories a man like me breaks his hand on a man like him and calls the pain a policy change. Instead, I lifted the folder and felt the weight of all the names not printed there. My father's, my mother's, the kids who sweep my lot in summer for pocket money and drink their sodas like paychecks. "You mistook my quiet for surrender," I said. "That's a mistake you only get to make once." He left with a parting shot about avoiding unpleasantness, which is what men like him call consequences. That night I stood in the wash bay behind the shop and let the hose roar into the drain until steam fogged the grates. I pictured Alara laughing at something I couldn't hear, the way her head tilted when she was proud of herself, and wondered what shape pride takes when it stops belonging to you. Grief is the body's slowest tool. It takes its time, measures twice, then cuts exactly where you beg it not to. In the morning I changed the locks. By noon I called my bank and severed every joint account Alara hadn't already starved of anything sentimental. By evening I packed her clothes into boxes and stacked them in the office with a note that said pick up tomorrow, 10 a.m., no later. I don't know if that made me cruel or careful. Sometimes there's no difference. When she arrived at 10:37, she looked smaller than the suit she wore, like ambition had borrowed her skin and forgot to return it. "Is this who you are now?" she asked quietly. "No," I said and held open the door. "This is who I become when someone else rewrites my vows without my name on the signature line." She took the boxes and left without looking back. I watched the dust hang in the air after the tailgate slammed, tiny galaxies suspended between what I built and what it costs to keep building. That night I slept on the office couch and dreamed of wrenches falling endlessly through water. If a town were a machine, the rumors would be its belts, endless, elastic, and always a breath from snapping. Within days, the story rotated through the diner, barber shop, and school pickup line, until strangers were telling me how I felt with the confidence of prophets. I kept my mouth shut because any word I gave them would get loaned out until it came back owing interest. The lot stayed busy, a rash of trade-ins, 3 families looking for minivans that wouldn't betray them, 1 kid wanting a project car to fix with his granddad before summer ended. Work is a mercy. It puts your hands between you and the cliff. Alara didn't call, which was kinder than she knew. Caspian called once, leaving a voicemail that sounded like a man practicing sympathy in the mirror. "We're adults," he said, like the word was a credit score. "The transition can be beneficial for all parties if managed correctly." He'd attached a stipend to the message, more insult than money, enough to suggest my cooperation could be rented by the month. I wired it back before the bank could blink. Then the pressure changed. That's how storm fronts announce themselves. Your body knows before the clouds admit it. I arrived at the lot one morning to find a bright red sticker slapped across my office door. Pending city inspection. OPERATIONS temporarily suspended. No notice, no violation cited, no explanation. The phone rang within the hour, a silky voice from the city's business compliance unit informing me of routine reviews triggered by anonymous complaints. The tone suggested the complaints had introduced themselves at a rooftop party first. I drove to the municipal building where bureaucracy goes to stretch and preen. A woman with immaculate nails and tired eyes told me to take a seat, which I did for 2 hours while a TV in the corner played a news segment about downtown revitalization. The anchor smiled like a timeshare presentation as footage cut to Caspian, standing with the mayor on a sunlit balcony, discussing a mixed-use development that would bring vibrancy and investment to the riverfront. Behind them, a rendering flashed, sleek towers, green terraces, and a tasteful suggestion of poor people relocated off-screen. When I finally got an audience with a compliance officer, he leafed through my file with the cadaverous interest of a man who buried his moral flex in an old briefcase. "We received tips about improper disposal of automotive fluids," he said. "We'll need to see your storage area, manifests, and the last 6 months of invoices." I showed him everything. My father taught me that the only way to deal with people who weaponize doubt is to leave them nowhere to store it. He found nothing, and left me with a perfunctory nod that felt like someone returning a favor they'd hoped to keep. By afternoon, the sticker was gone. By evening, a black SUV idled across the street long enough for me to feel the weight of its gaze. Men like Caspian love proxies. It keeps their hands clean for photographs. I told myself to stay level. Then the photo hit the local blog, Alara and Caspian stepping out of a restaurant with the governor's chief of staff, a caption dripping with civic pride. It's strange how a lens can make a familiar profile look like evidence. Friends sent the link with emojis they hoped meant comfort. It felt like someone handing me a map to the place I'd been robbed. 2 nights later, I heard tires on gravel outside the shop at 2 a.m. I went out with a flashlight and a crowbar and found a teenager spray painting something obscene across the brick. He dropped the can when the beam hit him and bolted. I didn't chase. The words dripped down the wall, red and stupid. I hosed them off until the water ran clear and my hands shook. In the morning, I painted the entire wall a clean, stubborn white. Sometimes the only way to answer is to erase and start again. Then came a call I didn't expect. Ilara's grandmother's oldest friend, Ruth, a woman who once told me to fix her furnace and stay for pie or she'd set my pants on fire with a glare. "Come by," she said. "Bring your calm." I found her on the porch with a teapot and a stack of old photo albums. "She remembers loss," Ruth said without preamble. "Ilara, she remembers it more than she admits." Some people choose momentum because stopping makes the ghosts catch up. I stared at the photo of Ilara as a girl, knees skinned, grin defiant, parents on either side like parentheses. "What are you telling me?" I asked. "That you can be right and still lose," she said gently. "Decide what kind of loss you can live with." On the way back, I stopped at the river. Water talks even when it doesn't care you're listening. Across the bend, stakes had sprouted with neon tape fluttering like nervous birds, survey flags, the first syllables of a language my town wasn't ready to speak. I knew whose hands had arranged them without touching dirt. That night Ilara texted, "We need to talk." I stared until the words blurred. Then I typed, "Tomorrow, 8 p.m. office." She arrived at 8:12 with rain on her collar and eyes that had stopped sleeping. We didn't sit. There are conversations you have on your feet because they require balance. "They're pushing the riverfront deal through fast," she said, voice low. "He'll use you." "Already tried," I said. "He'll try again with threats that look like help." "I know," I said. "Do you love him?" The question landed between us like a wrench I didn't want to drop. She flinched. "I love the person I am in rooms where he thinks I'm necessary," she said. "That's not the same thing." "Then choose," I said, because sometimes mercy is a cliff. She stared at the calendar on my wall, the one with oil smudges where my thumb always lands, and said nothing. When she finally looked back, there was weather in her eyes. "I can't yet," she whispered. "Then I will," I said, and walked her to the door. After she left, I locked everything I could lock and sat on the floor until the concrete told my bones it was time to stand. The next escalation didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like paperwork. A courier delivered a thick envelope stamped with an embossed logo that made the light nervous. Inside, a cease and desist accusing me of defamation for unspecified statements I hadn't made. A proposed settlement for selling the lot at above-market generosity, and a non-compete clause so broad it essentially outlawed my livelihood within 50 miles for 5 years. The message inside the message was plain: "Get out of the way, and we'll let you keep your shadow." I took the envelope to Lee Ortiz, a lawyer whose office is a cramped second floor above the bakery, walls lined with law books that smell like stubborn. She read fast, lips pressed thin, eyebrows doing a language I didn't understand but trusted. "This is pressure dressed as courtesy," she said. "They're betting you fold because you're tired, and they'll keep raising the bet while calling it a favor." "What do I do?" I asked. "Decide if your fight is the lot or the principle," she said. "Fighting both costs triple." Before I could answer, the fire alarm down the block screamed and the whole bakery emptied, ovens sighing smoke like old men. We watched as the volunteer crew rolled in, efficient choreography practiced on bad nights and fundraisers. While they worked, Lee said quietly, "You're not the only one getting squeezed. They're calling code violations on the hardware store, slow-walking permits for the daycare expansion, randomly auditing the co-op. The point is to exhaust everyone at once so nobody has hands free to carry anyone else." "Who's they?" I asked. "Pick a suit," she said. I went back to the lot and found a man waiting by the hood of a sedan I'd been tuning. He wore a tailor's understanding of my budget and smiled like he remembered my childhood wrong on purpose. "Rowan," he said, "you don't know me. Name's Gideon Pike. I'm a fixer." "Of what?" I asked. "Consequences," he said. "I'm the guy people like Caspian hire when they need solutions that don't fit in memos." "Why introduce yourself?" I asked. "Because I prefer my warnings to sound like advice," he said pleasantly. "You're about to find your suppliers delayed, your insurance mysteriously reviewed, your Google listing plagued by bad faith. If you pivot, sell, bless the development at the council meeting next week, I can make all that stop before it starts. And if I don't," I asked, "you'll become a cautionary tale. People love those almost as much as they love a ribbon cutting. There's a moment in every repair where you decide whether to replace the part or rebuild the system." I thanked him for the courtesy and walked into my office, shut the door, and called every small business owner I knew who'd ever given me a cup of coffee on credit. We met that night in the back of the hardware store, the aisles smelling like metal and promises. The list of grievances could have been a grocery receipt, small, humiliating, cumulative. Permits lost, fines invented, delivery trucks accidentally rerouted. The shape of it was obvious to anyone not paid to ignore geometry. This wasn't revitalization, it was siege. We formed a coalition with a name that sounded boring on purpose: Riverfront Stewardship Committee, filed public records requests, hired Lee on retainer, and drafted a statement that measured rage with civility. The plan wasn't to win headlines, it was to make obstruction expensive. You cannot shame men like Caspian, you can, however, cost them. 3 days later, Alara came by after hours. She didn't knock, she never had to. Something in her stance told me she had burned a bridge and was here to warm her hands. "I told him no," she said. "No to the arrangement, no to the non-compete, no to using you like a chess piece." Her voice shook and then found its spine. He didn't take it well, said I was making a sentimental error. I told him not all errors are equal. Some errors you live with because they keep you the person you can stand waking up as. I wanted to fold her into my chest and also ask why it took a war to remember we were a country. Instead, I poured coffee and said, "What does he do when people say no?" "He punishes," she said simply. Quietly, publicly, expertly, he called Gideon. "I met Gideon," I said. "He radiates helpful violence." She nodded. "He started on your suppliers. Your brake rotors are sitting in a warehouse 90 miles away marked backorder even though they're not. Your carrier is reviewing coverage. Your DMV titles will now take twice as long unless you make a donation to a campaign you don't believe in." "How do you know?" I asked. "Because I know the emails to write and the people who forget to BCC," she said. "What do you want from me?" I asked, the question naked and necessary. "A chance," she said, "to help fix what I helped break. I can't promise I know how to be the person you deserve, but I can promise I won't be the person who left you to fight alone." I looked at the wall calendar again, the squares full of grease and obligation, and thought about Ruth's porch, about loss you can live with. "Then stay," I said. "Stay and make it cost him." We worked late drafting affidavits and archiving screenshots. The night felt like a bridge we weren't sure could hold us until we were halfway across. Around 2, I caught her watching me the way you watch a house you're deciding to buy, scanning for cracks, imagining furniture, daring the floor to give. "I don't know if you can forgive me," she said quietly. "I don't know if I should," I said. We let the truth sit between us like a third chair at a table set for 2. The council chambers smelled like dust and temper. The night of the vote, half the town showed up wearing their best thrift store blazers and church shoes, the other half wearing neon safety vests and hard hats provided by the development's PR team. Caspian sat near the front with the mayor, their smiles practiced for the cameras, their eyes scanning the room for leverage. Gideon waited against the back wall like a shadow that had learned law. I took a seat beside Lee and Alara, who kept her face neutral in that lawyerly way that says, "I am listening and also remembering everything you will regret." Public comment is where democracy goes to remember itself. People stood and spoke their fear and hope in equal measure. The developer's architects presented slides with trees on rooftops and happy couples drinking coffee on balconies that will never know the smell of line-dried sheets. Then Lee called our witnesses: the daycare owner with a file of delayed permits, the hardware store clerk with the fire code inspection scheduled 3 times in a week, the trucker who, accidentally, got rerouted to a warehouse 50 miles away until he threatened to livestream. Each story was small, which is how you hide a large thing in plain sight. When it was my turn, I didn't bring poetry, I brought receipts. I read dates and times, emails and return labels, a list of suppliers who suddenly forgot how to deliver. I spoke of a red sticker on a door that had been inspected clean for years. I held up the cease and desist and said, "This is not how neighbors talk. This is how conquerors make friends." Caspian's jaw did a small twitch, the first time his face admitted it had muscles. Then Alara stood. In another life, this would have been a love story's pivot. In this one, it was a ledger balancing. She introduced herself as counsel for the coalition, outlined a pattern of administrative pressure that would make a civics teacher drink at lunch, and carefully, precisely, named Gideon as a consultant whose engagement created an appearance and arguably a reality of coordinated intimidation. She stopped short of accusing Caspian outright of crimes because there are lines you don't cross without a U-Haul for your life. But she drew a map so clear anyone could walk it. The vote wasn't a victory. Victories in rooms like that don't come with confetti, they come with postponements. The council delayed approval pending review by the state ethics board. It bought us 6 weeks. In a siege, 6 weeks is a feast. Afterward, in the damp night outside the courthouse, cameras flickered like lightning bugs with budgets. Caspian approached with press in tow, his voice tuned to statesman. "We welcome transparency," he said. "We believe in process." He looked at me and added, almost warmly, "and in neighbors finding ways to coexist as the world changes." "Some neighbors cut your fence and ask to borrow your lawnmower," I said. "Those neighbors should move." He smiled, but his eyes announced winter. "Be careful, Mr. Hale," he said softly, so the microphones wouldn't steal it. "Every story needs a villain. The town is deciding who it is." "I fix cars," I said. "You fix narratives. Only one of us leaves people stranded on the side of the road." 3 nights later, the attack came sideways. Not on me, but on Jamie, the kid I'd taught to gap spark plugs with the feel in his fingertips. He closed the shop, turned off the lights, stepped into the lot, and 2 figures in hoodies shoved him hard enough to make the ground forget his name. They didn't take his wallet. They took his confidence. He called me at midnight, voice shaking, an apology tangled in the story because that's how good people process other people's cruelty. I found him on the curb, bloody lip, scraped palms, anger trying to find a home. I drove him to the ER, sat through fluorescent purgatory, and told him the only true thing I knew. This is how they test what we're made of. We answer by not changing into something ugly. In the morning, I installed new floodlights and a camera system that cost as much as my first car. Lee filed police reports and requested patrols. Ilara traced the attack back to nowhere and everywhere. No digital footprints. Just a message. They want you scared enough to be grateful when it stops. "What if it doesn't?" I asked. "Then we get louder," she said. That weekend, we held a community cookout in the lot because sometimes you answer a siege with potato salad. People came. Old men brought guitars. Kids chalked rainbows on the asphalt and then drove matchbox cars over them like highways to a better county. We announced a legal fund and a volunteer network to walk employees to their cars at night. When the sun dropped, someone turned on a projector and showed a movie on the newly white wall. For 2 hours, the lot forgot it was a battlefield and remembered it was a place where families picked their next road trip. Caspian drove by, slow, windows up, face unreadable through glass that cost more than honesty. Gideon didn't appear. That made me more afraid than if he had. The 6 weeks the ethics board bought us stretched and snapped. The board asked questions. The city performed cooperation. Caspian pivoted, a man always mid-spin, announcing philanthropic initiatives that smelled like perfume on a bruise. A scholarship for underprivileged youth in tech, a donation to the fire department, a promise to preserve select heritage features of the riverfront, which likely meant a plaque in a lobby nobody from here could afford to cross. In the middle of that theater, Ilara resigned. She submitted a letter that read like a courtroom closing, measured, unsparing, a request to put the truth on the record even if the verdict went the other way. She moved into her aunt's spare room 2 streets over, not back to my house, an act of humility that felt like respect. We saw each other every day anyway. Some mornings we walked by the river without holding hands because patience is a muscle you grow or it grows you. Gideon tried once more. He found me alone at the diner, slid into the booth with a nod at the waitress who gave him coffee without asking, as if unspoken rules applied to men with his posture. "You're winning the small battles," he said. "It won't change the war." "Maybe the point isn't to win," I said. "Maybe it's to teach them why they should feel shame for how they chose to fight." He smiled in that way, professional, almost appreciative. "I don't believe in shame," he said. "I believe in outcomes. How about one where you still own your shop in a year?" "And what do I do for that outcome?" I asked. He slid a paper across the table. It was a speech. Words approved by PR, timed for cameras, the kind of statement that reduces a man to geometry. "You deliver this at the groundbreaking," he said. "You become the story of local businessman partners with progress. You will be protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. He didn't answer. The silence answered him. I left the speech on the table and paid for his coffee. When I reached the door, he called after me, "You think you're the first honest man I've met." I didn't turn. "I think you're the last person to recognize one," I said. 2 nights later, the line we'd been walking discovered its cliff. Somebody cut the brake lines on 3 cars on my lot. If Jamie hadn't insisted on our new protocol, double checks on any car moved after hours, someone would have died on a test drive. He caught the damage, his voice a tight wire when he called me over. We stared at the severed lines, fury a hot bell in our throats. I called the police, who were duly concerned and ultimately unhelpful. "No cameras captured the lot from that angle. No witnesses. We'll increase patrols." "They're not ghosts," I said. "They're employees. Somewhere someone's payroll is missing 2 hours. I went home and didn't sleep. At dawn, I drove to Caspian's building and waited outside like a truth he wasn't ready to hear. When he stepped onto the sidewalk with his phone glued to his ear, I stepped in front of him. "They cut brake lines," I said. He glanced at Gideon, who hovered 3 paces back like a polite apocalypse. "That's criminal," Caspian said smoothly. "I abhor criminality." "You hire it," I said. "Lawfully," he said, which is not a denial. "Call them off," I said. "I don't control the weather," he said. "You bragged you said it," I answered. For the first time his gaze faltered. "You should be careful making enemies you can't afford," he said quietly. "I've been poor," I said. "It taught me how to live. Can your friends say the same?" The ethics board issued its report the following week, tepid, bureaucratic, but not nothing. It recommended further review of contracting processes and admonished the city for the appearance of undue influence, without naming anyone who sends fruit baskets to power. The council postponed again. Caspian smiled, then announced a scaled-back first phase to demonstrate good faith. Good faith is a phrase that dies under lights. That night, Ilara stood in my office doorway holding a cardboard box. "What's that?" I asked. "Everything I didn't earn honestly," she said. It was a pile of firm swag and a framed certificate. She set the box down and looked at me with eyes that remembered Ruth's porch. "I can't undo what I did," she said. "But I can change what I do next. If you'll let me, I want to build a clinic, legal aid here for here. I want to spend the rest of my career making the kind of weather people plant in." I nodded because sometimes the only answer to good news is to get out of its way. We carried desks across town that weekend, painted walls with volunteers who pretended not to notice when we almost touched and then didn't. The sign went up on Monday, River Legal Collective. The waiting room filled by Tuesday. People cried when their rent evictions got paused long enough for dignity to show up. On Thursday, a young mother hugged Alara until the past could not breathe. Stories like this don't end. They settle into the ground and grow in crooked. The development didn't die. Phase 1 went up, glass, steel, a tasteful cafe where a real cup of coffee costs a memory. But the river kept its trees where the grove thickened, because the easements we wrangled into being hardened into law. The lot survived because the coalition made obstruction too expensive, and because sometimes a town remembers that the reason it stayed small is not because it was weak, but because it was stubborn. Caspian pivoted to another city because men like him own seasons, not climates. Before he left, I got a letter, a single page with one sentence. "Congratulations on your victory." That's the thing about men who cannot say loss. They rename it until it stops fighting them. Gideon stayed, because fixers always do. He nodded at me once across Main Street like two men who share a religion they won't admit to. Alara and I didn't put our rings back on all at once. Forgiveness is a craft, not a mood. It took months of small chores, she cataloging grant applications, me teaching a teenager to respect torque specs, both of us learning the new choreography of trust. We rebuilt our vows the way you rebuild an engine that failed under pressure. Replace the parts that cracked, polish the ones that held, change the fluids, test under heat, listen without music until the idol settles honest. Ruth died that winter, a soft passing with hands held and pie cooling on the counter as if she meant to come right back. At her funeral, the pastor read a line about time redeeming what people damage, and I thought of Alara's cardboard box of break lines and red stickers, of a speech left on a diner table. After the service, Alara and I drove to the river and stood where the survey flags had once shivered like fear. The grove whispered the way trees do when they're pretending not to be proud. "Do you ever think about the life where I said no sooner?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "Do you hate me for not living that life?" she asked. "I hate the months," I said. "Not the years were real." She nodded, a small, brave motion. "Thank you for letting me fight for the chance to be the person I should have been before I forgot how to stop running," she said. "Thank you for deciding the loss you could live with," I answered. Spring returned with the smell of new tires and wet dirt. Jamie got engaged to the nurse who stitched his lip, two people who learned the contested art of choosing anyway. The coalition turned into a habit. We met monthly, argued about signage and zoning, learned that democracy is just chores done in public. The River Legal Collective survived its first audit, which is to say it became real. We hosted a block party and raffled off free oil changes and free consultations. And afterward everyone said it felt like the old days even though it wasn't. The trick I'm learning is to build a new old day, one honest enough to survive sunsets. One evening, as the sun threw itself at the canyon between the new glass and the old brick, a black sedan pulled into the lot. For a moment my body remembered fear. Then a young man stepped out in a suit one size too hopeful and asked if we had anything under $5,000 that would get him to the job he'd just landed. We did. I walked him through valves and mileage like a blessing. When he turned the key and the engine came alive, he grinned the way people do when the future makes a sound. "Feels like mine already," he said. "Good," I answered. "Take care of it and it will forgive your mistakes." That night, Alara and I ate at the diner. The waitress poured coffee like an oath. The pie tasted like the kind of sugar that forgives the tongue its sins. "To Ruth," Alara said, lifting her fork. "To engines that stop knocking," I added. "To weather we can plant in," she said. "To outcomes that don't require villains," I answered. We clinked our forks and laughed because it sounded foolish and holy at the same time. On the way home, we stopped by the river. There is a bench there now, carved by a kid in the high school shop class. It says in letters a little uneven, "We keep each other." We sat until the dark turned kind. "I'm scared sometimes that I'll run again," Alara said. "Then be scared with me," I said. "We'll run toward." She took my hand. The river answered with its only sermon, onward. We went home to a house that had learned our new footsteps. I lay awake for a long time listening to the old pipes, the neighbor's dog, the far-off train that still rattles the picture frames if you forget to wedge them. I thought of the months I would not forgive and the years I would. I thought of Caspian in a different skyline, setting different weather, and of Gideon measuring outcomes in a ledger even he doesn't believe in. I thought of the young man's grin when the engine turned over. And then I slept. Morning always asks the same question. We answered it with coffee, tools, and a door we kept unlocking.